Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the final session of the first ever Horizon Europe Cluster 5 Climate, Energy and Mobility Info Days. My name is Patrick Olar and I'm the head of Department for Green Research and Innovation in CINEA, the European Climate Infrastructure and Environment Executive Agency. We are reaching the end of a full and, if I may say, very successful two-day event to present the first calls of Horizon Europe Cluster 5. During these 2 days, we have heard from representatives from the European Commission presenting the policy aspect and expected outputs of each call, and potential applicants had the opportunity to clarify the questions and learning the key aspects that future awarded grants should address. All sessions have been recorded and the videos are available on the webpage of the Info Days. I will be the moderator for this final plenary session dedicated to present the concrete aspects related to grant management, audit processes, and the submission and evaluation of proposals. This is a different type of session from the ones you have heard during these 2 days, as it is intended to give you concrete tips and insights on how to prepare your proposals, also considering the future aspects related with obligations in the Horizon Europe Model Grant Agreement. We will hear this afternoon from colleagues from the Common Implementation Center of the Directorate General for Research and Innovation, and you will have the possibility to clarify all your questions in the dedicated Q&A session that will follow. I encourage you to submit your questions and use the voting system in case others have already submitted a question you would like to see answered. The Slido tool is accessible on the web page of these Info Days. I would now like to introduce you to the speakers of this afternoon. First speaker is Ms. Isabelle Leroy, who is a legal assistant for financial issues in DG Research and Innovation. The second speaker will be Mrs. Sorin Serban, who is a team leader in DG R&I for ex-post audit and quality control. And the last speaker is Mrs. Isabel Vergara, who is a deputy head of unit of common service for business processes in DG Research and Innovation. I would like to thank all the speakers for their presence. My last note for the introduction is to inform you that the first 2 presentations of this afternoon are pre-recorded and will be launched one after the other. Isabel will join after presenting live the submissions and evaluation aspects, and then the Q&A session will follow. Without further ado, I would like now to pass the floor to Mrs. Isabelle Leroy.
Hello, my name is Isabelle Leroy. I work for the Common Legal Support Service in the European Commission in the Directorate for Research and Innovation. And we provide legal assistance for the setup and implementation of the European Framework Programs for Research and Innovation, and notably the new program Horizon Europe. In this video, I'm going to give you a guided tour of the Model Grant Agreement for Horizon Europe. So what's a grant agreement? Basically, it's the contractual document that beneficiaries of a grant will sign with the European Commission or one of its executive agencies or a joint undertaking. So the grant agreement arrives at a stage after you have submitted a successful application to a call for proposal and after you have been invited to the preparation of the grant. And then you head to the signature of the grant. The grant agreement will lay down the rights and obligations that you have in respect of the grant. So it will lay down, for instance, your right to receive funding or to own results. And it will lay down your obligations, such as the obligation to implement the project, the obligation to submit reports, etc. It also contains essential features of the grant, such as its duration, how much money you can get, and the conditions to obtain the funding. So now I'm going to present you the essential features of the Horizon Europe Model Grant Agreement with a focus on the novelties in Horizon Europe compared to Horizon 2020, which was the previous framework program. So let's start. First, I will start with the types of participation in a project and notably whether you can participate without signing the grant agreement. So the main case is that you prepare a proposal with a consortium and as a member of the consortium, and then you sign a grant agreement. and the signature of the grant agreement gives you the status of a beneficiary. In fact, only beneficiaries sign the grant agreement, and the beneficiaries have all the rights and obligations in the grant agreement. Differently, you may be involved in a project and in a consortium without being a beneficiary, and thereby without signing the grant agreement. And in this case, you would have the status of a third party to the grant agreement. And there are several types of third parties, and we're going to focus now on the types of third parties that carry out work, or so-called action tasks. So the first type of third parties that carry out action tasks are affiliated entities. So they carry out action tasks, they declare their own costs, and they have a legal or capital link to a beneficiary. In fact, affiliated entities correspond exactly to linked third parties under Horizon 2020. Then we have associated partners. They also carry out action tasks, but they cannot declare costs. And then another type of third party that carry out action tasks are subcontractors. So they work against a price paid by a beneficiary, and then the beneficiary can declare its cost for the subcontract under the grant. Now, how does the Horizon Europe Model Grant Agreement look like? Well, in fact, it's an electronic document, and all the management of the grant is done electronically, from the signature of the grant throughout to the payment and reports. And all the communication related to the grant is also done electronically. And this is done via the Funding and Tender Opportunities portal. Concerning the structure of the grant, you will see that the main part is common, and we also call that corporate, in the sense that it's common with all directly managed EU programs. So if you're participating in another EU programs, for instance, LIFE, you will see that the grant agreement has the main core part, and it also shares to a great extent the same rights and obligations and the same terminology. So this brings simplicity, it's a novelty, and it also should help to facilitate synergies between programs. However, each program still have some specificities, and the specificities are in Annex 5 of the grant agreement. So the specificities for Horizon Europe are in the Annex 5 of the Horizon Europe Model Grant Agreement. Now we're going to explain more. First, let's see what is the common structure of the Horizon Europe Model Grant Agreement. So you can see here what is the common structure of the Horizon Europe Model Grant Agreement, and there are two main parts. The first part is a novelty in Horizon Europe, and it's called the data sheet. The data sheet is a summary of the data which is specific to your grant. So it enables you to see at a glance the key features of your grant. For instance, who are the participants, the grant amount, the forms of funding, the modalities for reporting and payments, and you find this data sheet right at the beginning of your grant agreement. Then you have the common articles. And the structure and these articles have a lot in common with what we had under Horizon 2020. So there's also a lot of similarity in terms of the grouping of the articles. So this starts with the first articles on the main features of the grant, such as the subject and the duration of the grant. Then in the next articles, you have the funding rate, the grant amount, the forms of funding, and also the conditions for the funding to be eligible. That is still in Article 6. Then we have articles on the implementation of the grant, including rules on third parties and also provisions on reports and payments. Then we have articles on consequences in case of non-compliance. And at the end, there are articles on the final provisions. Then after the articles, we have annexes. Here you see all the annexes of the Horizon Europe Model Grant Agreement. First, there is Annex 1, which is still the description of the work as it was under Horizon 2020. Then you have Annex 2, which is an estimated budget of the action. Then Annex 3 is the accession form which beneficiaries must sign to accede to the grant agreement. Then Annex 4 is the model of the financial statement that you will use to report your costs. And finally, Annex 5 is where you find the specificities for Horizon Europe, as I explained previously. So in Annex 5, you're going to find non-financial provisions which are specific to Horizon Europe, notably concerning ethics, gender, rules on intellectual property rights, which are quite detailed in research and innovation actions. And you will also find specific rules for specific parts of Horizon Europe, for instance, for the actions of the European Research Council, or for Marie Sklodowska-Curie actions, or for actions of the European Innovation Council, just to mention a few. Now we see in more details what you can find in Annex 2, which is the estimated budget of the action. And you see notably the budget categories, and you see the budget categories from A to E. So under A, you have personal costs. That's costs for the time worked by a person on the action. And this person can be an employee of the beneficiary. It can also, and as in under Horizon 2020, be certain types of consultants, notably when there are natural persons which have a direct contract with the beneficiary. It can also be persons which are seconded by a third party to the beneficiary. And there is also a possibility for the owners of small and medium enterprises who do not receive a salary to declare personal costs. Then under B, you have subcontracting costs. That's for the case where a beneficiary outsourced an action task against a price. And this must be indicated also in the Annex 1 of the grant agreement. Then under C, we have purchase costs. That's costs for goods, works, and services which are purchased or paid by the beneficiary to a third party. Under this category, you find costs for travel and subsistence, which are necessary for the action. You find also costs for equipment, which are usually depreciation costs. And you find costs for other goods, works, and services, which cover notably consumables. Then D is the last category of direct costs. And there you find costs for financial support to third parties, costs for internally invoiced goods and services. And then you find a series of specific costs for specific parts of Horizon Europe. Let's say, for instance, for an ERC action, so an action of the European Research Council. Finally, under E, it's indirect costs. And for those of you who are familiar with Horizon 2020, we calculate them in the same way by applying a flat rate of 25% to certain direct costs. Now we're going to explain the main novelties in the Horizon Europe Model Grant Agreement. And we're going to explain these novelties compared to Horizon 2020. So, first, we have the affiliated entities, and we have already mentioned that this is a type of third parties that carry out action tasks. Here, the change is only in terms of terminology, because this is the same notion as linked third parties under Horizon 2020. Then the notion of associated partner under Horizon Europe builds upon the notion of international partner under Horizon 2020. So they are also third parties carrying out action tasks, and they have a link to one or more beneficiaries or to the whole consortium, who must then make sure that the associated partner complies with applicable obligations. And the associated partner carries out work but cannot declare costs. Then, concerning open science, the provisions for open science are going one step further in the approach that has been set up progressively in the last two framework programs. Concerning the main changes at the level of the grant agreement, there is an obligation to provide immediate open access in peer-reviewed scientific publication through trusted repositories and with open licenses. Linked to this, only publication fees for full open access venues will be eligible for reimbursement. So publication in hybrid journals are still possible, but the publication fees are not reimbursed. And beneficiaries must also manage their research data responsibly, in line with the FAIR principle and in line with the principle as open as possible, as closed as necessary. There may be, besides, other obligations if indicated in the work program. Now, in terms of exploitation, there is a renewed focus on the exploitation of results, cutting throughout the life cycle of the project, from the proposal until after the end of the project. And while the general best effort obligations to exploit results remain the same as under Horizon 2020, beneficiaries will have an obligation to provide a result ownership list at the end of the action, which makes clear the situation in terms of ownership. And if, despite the best efforts of beneficiaries, there are results which remain unexploited within 1 year after the end of the project, then the beneficiaries will have to use a platform, the Horizon Results Platform, to showcase their results and to find interested parties to help them exploit them. There may also be additional obligations if indicated in the work program. Next, concerning personal costs, I will detail the main change in the next slide. Concerning internal invoicing, so beneficiaries still have the possibility to declare costs for internally invoiced goods and services based on their usual cost accounting practices. But the novelty in the Horizon Europe is that actual indirect costs for internal invoices can also be declared based on the usual cost accounting practices of the beneficiary. So, and that is instead of using the flat rate of 25% that is used to calculate the other indirect costs. So here we are relying more on your usual cost accounting practices. Then about in-kind contributions against payment. The change here is only that they don't have anymore a specific provision mentioning them explicitly in the grant agreement. However, they remain eligible. So that's the case for seconded personnel that is seconded by a third party to a beneficiary against payment and which falls under personal costs. And also other types of in-kind contribution against payment can fall under purchase costs. Finally, the CFS is the certificate on the financial statement, and it has to be provided when beneficiary requests above a certain threshold of EU requested contribution. The system will remain the same under Horizon 2020. The difference here is that the threshold is increased to 430,000 euros. And this increase in the threshold reflects only that there's a wider basis of costs to calculate the threshold. And now the basis is actually the whole requested EU contribution. So this makes things simpler in terms of calculation, but without changing the incidence of this certificate. Now, as I told you, I'm going to explain a bit more about personal costs. And so concerning the way to calculate and report your personal costs, there is a change compared to Horizon 2020, which is worth noting. And that's the change is that the calculation of personal cost will no longer be based on an hourly rate with a variety of options in the calculation. Instead, it will now be based on a rate per day, so a daily rate, and with a single formula to calculate this daily rate. So in practice, to calculate this daily rate, you will divide the actual annual personal cost of the person by a fixed number of days, which correspond to productive days per year. And this fixed number of days is 215 days. And so it's 215 days across the board. So this approach brings simplicity and legal certainty because of the use of this fixed number 215. And it also brings some simplicity because it's common to other EU programs. So if you are participating in Horizon Europe and in another program, let's say in Digital Europe, you will see that the same approach applies for the calculation of personal costs. So this approach applies to all actions where the costs are reimbursed on the basis of actual costs. And for Horizon Europe, this concerns notably research and innovation actions, also actions of the European Research Council, or actions of the European Institute for Innovation and Technology, just to name a few. And then when you have determined this daily rate, the way to obtain the personal cost that you can declare is simply by multiplying this daily rate by the number of days that the person actually worked on the action. So I have now presented you the main features of the Horizon Europe Model Grant Agreement. You can find the general model grant agreement for Horizon Europe published on the webpage that you can see on the slide. So in practice, you find this publication on the Funding and Tender Opportunities portal under the section for Horizon Europe, and more precisely on the webpage for the reference documents of Horizon Europe. And I now thank you for your attention.
Welcome. We will talk about system and process audits in Horizon Europe, which is a novelty for audits in the new framework program. The system and process audit is a risk assessment and an audit opinion, which is done in two steps. First is to assess the controls, what we call a test of controls or test of the systems, in order to assess several types of risk. The second step is to do substantive testing, test of transactions, in order to be able to provide an audit opinion. Inherent risk, there are three types of risk to be assessed in this exercise, which are the inherent risk at the level of the entity, which is more outside of the entity, the control risk within the entity, which is more linked to the way the beneficiary or the entity works, and the budget category specific control risk, which is more linked to the project-based accounting and linked to each type of cost, like for example, subcontracting or personnel. The purpose is to provide, as I was saying, one output, one audit report, one single audit report in two parts, basically to give the results of the assessment, the risk assessment, and the audit opinion with the help of the test of transactions. The combined review result should be a flag of low, medium, or high risk. Who can apply for the system and process audits? Any beneficiary that basically used to apply also or applied for a certificate of methodology for unit cost, which uses unit flat rate or lump sum cost or contributions according to documented, which are formally approved and in writing, usual cost accounting practices, if any. Or any beneficiary that has formalized documentation on the system and processes for calculating their cost and contributions, which are formally approved and in writing. Of course, the second condition is that this beneficiary has participated in at least 150 actions under Horizon 2020 or Euratom, and the beneficiary participates in at least 3 ongoing actions under Horizon Europe or Euratom. So who can apply for this scheme is any beneficiary that uses unit cost, flat rate, or lump sum cost, or contributions according to documented usual cost accounting practices, basically formally approved and in writing in fact. Or any beneficiary that fulfills the following 3 conditions: have formalized documentation on the system and processes for calculating their cost and contributions, formally approved and in writing, and have participated in at least 150 actions under Horizon 2020 or Euratom. And the third condition is that the entity participates in at least 3 ongoing actions under Horizon Europe or Euratom. The process to apply is quite straightforward. The first step is the beneficiary should submit the application in the system, which will be assessed by the auditors. The second step, the application is accepted. The auditors will carry out the system and process audit. The audit result will take form of a risk assessment classification, either as low, medium, or high risk. The benefits of beneficiaries, which are classified as low risk, are the following: either to have less or less in-depth ex-post audits and a higher threshold for submitting the CFS. For example, 725,000 euros instead of 430,000 euros. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I think we have now finished with 2 pre-recorded presentations, and I would like now to pass the floor to Isabel Fergara, who is live with us, and she was patiently waiting. So Isabel, please, floor is yours.
Yes, hello, good afternoon. Yes, I would like to present the novelties in the submission and evaluation part in Horizon Europe. So yes, if you can go directly to the next slide, please. And the next one. So I will divide my presentation into parts. So I will concentrate first in giving details about what is new in the submission process in Horizon Europe. And then I will give you also some details about the novelties in the evaluation process. So please, if you can go to the next one. Yes, so for the submission process, starting with the admissibility, we keep the same general conditions as in Horizon 2020. So the applications must be submitted before the call deadline, electronically via the funding and tenders portal. This is exactly the same as in Horizon 2020. Also the same is that the application must be complete, readable, accessible and printable, and must include a plan for exploitation and dissemination of results, unless this is provided otherwise in the specific call conditions. If you follow the proposal template that we publish and we offer to you to use in your topic, you have there already instructions on what type of information you need to include for this draft plan for the exploitation and dissemination of results. About admissibility, we have nevertheless some novelties, and these are mainly related to the page limit in proposals. So we have substantially reduced the maximum length of proposals. For RIAs and IAs, we have a limit in full applications of 45 pages. In CSAs, the limit is 30 pages. Although there might be exceptions, and I think this is the case in Cluster 5, where for all innovation actions, the page limit is 70 pages. Some RIAs, the page limit is 60, and some CSAs, the page limit is 45. So you really need to read carefully the call conditions of the topic that you plan to submit your proposal. So if you can go to the next slide, please. Yes, on the eligibility, we have slightly changed the consortium composition rule for collaborative projects, so for RIAs and IAs. So we still ask for a minimum of 3 independent legal entities coming from member states or associated countries. But the difference here is that at least one of them must be coming from a member state. And this is new in Horizon Europe. And then we also have an important novelty regardless eligibility conditions, and this is related to the gender equality plan. This is an eligibility condition that will apply only for calls with deadlines from 2022 on. So for the calls that are currently open, the eligibility condition is not applicable yet. So this eligibility condition is that we will request for participants that are public bodies, research organizations, or higher education establishments from member states and associated countries to have a gender equality plan with a minimum process-related requirements that you can find information about those minimum process-related requirements in the proposal template, for instance. We are not going to check whether every entity that apply for Horizon Europe topics or calls, whether they really have a gender equality plan. We are going to use a self-declaration. For the time being, this self-declaration is included in the proposal. In the future, in the coming months, we will include this self-declaration in the participant register. So you only have to declare once, and then we will retrieve this information that we have in our database in all proposals that you apply. So next slide, please. Then about associated countries. So for the time being, we have not concluded any association agreement, but we are already negotiating the negotiation agreement of many countries. So for the calls that are currently open, we consider as if they were associated countries in terms of submission and evaluation for all those countries that for which we are already discussing an association agreement. This includes the United Kingdom. So the United Kingdom most probably will associate to Horizon Europe. So with respect to submission and evaluation of the current topics, the United Kingdom participants will be considered as associated, as participants coming from an associated country, with the only condition that the association agreement must be signed before the grant signature is signed. For the time being, Switzerland is not included in this transitional arrangement. So for the time being, the participants coming from Switzerland, they are not considered as participants coming from associated countries. So if you can go to the next slide, please. And then about eligibility, the activities eligible for funding, here we have full continuity with regards to Horizon 2020. So the eligible activities are the ones described in the call conditions. They must focus exclusively on civil applications and must not aim at human cloning for reproductive purposes, intend to modify the genetic heritage of human beings, intend to create human embryos solely for the purpose of research, or lead to the destruction of human embryos. So you have here in this slide more details about the activities that are not eligible for funding. We will never fund these activities. And for this, the message is that is fully continuation with regards to Horizon 2020. So if you can go to the next slide, please. Then I would like to give you some information about the proposal template because we have made some changes in this proposal template with the aim to help you draft your proposal. So there is continuity in the structure, so it includes two parts, as in the case of Horizon 2020. The part A is web-based forms, so it's a document that is automatically generated by our submission tool with the information that you encode directly in the tool. And then we have the part B, which is the narrative part, so where you explain what you want to do in your proposal, and this you upload it as a PDF document. Here, the message that we want to pass is that we do not foresee any annexes to this part B unless this is specified in the topic conditions. So in the past, in many topics, you were used to send some support letters or other type of information that you uploaded as an annex. This is not foreseen unless it is specifically requested in the topic conditions. So if you can go to the next, please. So here is information about what we have changed in the proposal template. So in the part A, in the part that is automatically generated using the web-based forms, we have some new questions, some new fields that we have included. The first one is that we are asking the identity of the researchers that we already identified at the time you are writing your proposal. This is what we call the researchers table. So we understand, of course, that at the time you prepare your proposal, it might be that you have not yet identified all the researchers that will work in the project, but here we want you to identify those that you already know. And the reason we are asking this is because we have an indicator to evaluate the whole program, the whole Horizon Europe program, that refers to the researchers, the follow-up of the researchers' career. So in order to answer this Horizon Europe indicator, we need to know the identity of the researchers that work in our projects. So it is also important because we see some confusion here. So we are only looking for the identity of the researchers. So we are not asking to identify all people that will work in the for the project. It's only those that can be considered researchers. Then we have also a new question in part A, which is that every participant needs to identify the role from a predefined list of different roles, the role that this organization will play in the project. And then, of course, I already mentioned this, we have a question about the self-declaration on gender equality plan, that for the time being you need to answer in the proposal. In the future, it will be pre-filled with the information that we have in our participants registry. Then we have some fields that before in Horizon 2020 were in part B, and now we have moved them into part A. So those are the information that we were asking in sections 4 and 5 in the proposal template in Horizon 2020. So these are the ethics self-assessment, and the information on participants' previous activities related to the goals. So those informations, you have to encode it now in the part A of the proposal. And then in addition, we have a short questionnaire about security included in all Horizon Europe proposals. I will come back later with more information on this. And in part B, the structure is the same, so it includes 3 sections, 1 per evaluation criteria. What we have done is to include a lot of instructions about what exactly we are asking in every section. We have also included a glossary of terms, definition of the terms that we used, and we have ensured consistency on the use of terminology from the work program preparation to the proposal and also later on in the reporting of projects. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So far about the evaluation, the novelties in the submission process. Now, some information about what is new in the evaluation process. About the evaluation criteria, this is full continuity. We have the same evaluation criteria as in Horizon 2020. So these are 3 evaluation criteria: excellence, impact, and quality and efficiency of the implementation. The evaluation in the ERC is done only based on the excellence criterion. So they use only 1 evaluation criterion. However, we have adapted the evaluation criteria following the lessons learned in Horizon 2020. First, we have reduced the number of aspects to be taken into account in each of the evaluation criterion, ensuring that the same aspect is not assessed twice. There is an important change regarding the open science, because in Horizon 2020, we were evaluating the open science practices as part of the impact criterion. In Horizon Europe, we evaluate the open science practices as part of the scientific methodology, and this is part of the excellence criterion. We have a new approach to impact, what we call the key impact pathways. I will come back later on with more information on this. And then we have re-included the assessment of the quality of the individual applicants as part of the evaluation criteria. In Horizon 2020, we were evaluating the quality of the consortium as a whole. That was part of the assessment from experts. And then the quality of whether every individual participant had sufficient operational capacity was just a question that didn't have any influence in the evaluation results, with only that if one participant didn't have sufficient operational capacity, this participant could not participate in the project. So what we have done, the change that we have done in Horizon Europe, is that we are asking now, as part of the evaluation criterion number 3, so we ask the experts to assess the quality of the consortia and also the quality of the applicants, of the individual applicants. And then finally, we have removed the assessment of the management structures. This doesn't mean that we are not asking for this information, that we are. So we are asking you to include information about the management structures in the work package related to management. This is important information that we need, our project officers will need in the case the project is funded, but we are not going to ask our experts to assess the management structure. So you will not be evaluated on the quality of the management structures that you propose. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So then I will go through some of the policy aspects that are important all across the program and that are part of our evaluation process. So the first one I already mentioned is about open science. Is evaluated, is important all across the program, and will be evaluated as part of the excellence criterion. So when you design your scientific methodology, it's important that you take into consideration the requirements in open science for Horizon Europe. So this open science is not only about open access to publications and results, it's also about the active engagement of society at the time you design your work. So this is the reason it is important at the time you design your scientific methodology. So it is, of course, mandatory to offer open access to publications. You also must take into account that beneficiaries must retain sufficient IPRs to comply with open access requirements in the case you plan to publish in journals that are not fully open access. You need to inform those journals that you have an obligation to offer open access to these publications. And this is immediate. Yeah, this is a change in comparison with Horizon 2020. But then in addition, the work programs or the topic conditions may incentivize or oblige to adhere to open science practices, such as the involvement of citizens or to use the European Open Science Cloud. So you need to read carefully the topic conditions. And as I said, open science practices will be evaluated as part of the excellent criteria, but it's also important for you to know that at the time the experts evaluate the quality of the individual participants, they will evaluate positively the previous experience on open science practices of the participants. Yes, so if you can go to the next slide, please. So the second important policy consideration is about gender dimension in research and innovation content. This is not new in Horizon Europe. It was also very important in Horizon 2020. The difference here is that in Horizon 2020, we were flagging the topics in which the gender dimension was needed to take into account. Today, the approach in Horizon Europe is the other way around. So we consider that gender dimension in research and innovation content is important all across the program. So it has to be taken into account in all topics, unless it is mentioned otherwise in the topic description. So if you don't find any information about gender dimension, this means that it is important that you include it in the topic description. So if you don't find any information about gender dimension, this means that it is important that it is important that you take into consideration gender dimension in research and innovation content when you are designing your scientific methodology. So it's also important for you to understand that this is not about gender balance. We are not talking about gender balance. We are talking about the importance of taking into consideration gender aspects in the research. And here you have a list of examples that you probably will understand better. So for instance, if you are doing some research in COVID, it will be important that you take into consideration why we observe differences between women and men in infection levels and mortality rates. So this is an example. And you have in this list other examples that could fit better your type of activities. So if you can go to the next slide, please. And then, so it's also important for you to know that we are changing a bit the instructions that we offer for you to describe the impact of your proposal. So there in practical terms, we are not changing anything. So we still ask the participants to explain how the results of the project will have an impact. What we are doing is, or what we have done in the proposal template is to define better what we expect you to tell us at the time you describe the impact of your proposal. So for you, it is important to note that when you submit a proposal, you are submitting a proposal in a topic that is described already what we expect the impact will be with the projects that we fund in this topic. So we expect some effects of the projects that we fund under this topic at midterm, and this is what we call the expected outcome, and this is written in the topic that you are submitting your proposal. And we also expect effects of the projects that we fund at a longer term, and this is the expected impact that you can find in the destination to which the topic to which you are submitting your proposal belongs. So you need to take into consideration carefully what is the expected outcome and the expected impact of this topic and destination. And then through the dissemination and exploitation of the results that you expect to obtain in your proposal, you need to tell us how your project will have the effects that we are expecting. Midterm, the outcome, longer term, the impact. So the message here is that it is important that you read carefully the expected outcome of the topic and also the expected impact in the destination. Here you have some examples in this slide that I am not sure will fit very well your cluster, but this will give you an idea of the type of information that we expect you to include in the proposal. So you can go to the next slide, please. So here is just about the same. So it's more information about the definition of the terminology that we use in the work program description and also in the proposal template. And for you to know that when we write our work program, we start with the EU policy priorities, then we define the key strategic orientation, and then for the different areas that we want to have an impact or an effect, we define the impact areas and also the expected impacts and expected outcomes, impacts, longer term, outcomes, medium term, of the effects that we want to obtain. And of course, what you are contributing from the bottom to the top. So you expect to have some results with your activities that we have to contribute to the expected outcomes and impact that we include in the work program. So if you can go to the next slide, please. And it is also important that for this to express and to tell us what is the expected impact or the effect of the project results that you are expected to have, it's important that you also describe carefully the measures to maximize the impact, so the dissemination, exploitation, and communication activities. In the proposal template, we have made a large effort to explain what exactly we are asking here about the details of the dissemination, exploitation, and communication plan. And if you follow this proposal template, I think it will be easy for you to tell us exactly the information that we are expecting. So from one side, we expect details about the measures that you are planning in your project. Important also to tell us who are the target groups, so who will benefit from the results or effects of your project, through which channels you plan to interact with these target groups. It's also important that you include communication measures, and if important in the topic conditions, how you can contribute to the policy that we are also developing in the different areas. And of course, it's also important that you either exploit or disseminate the results of your projects, and you have to tell us how you plan to do this. So if you go to the next slide, please. And finally, I want to finalize with this slide, which is new in Horizon Europe, and it is about artificial intelligence. And this is something that we are going to take into consideration all across the program. So the artificial intelligence here has two different aspects. It might well be that we are asking for research in artificial intelligence, but it might also be that you are doing research in a totally different area, but that you are using artificial intelligence to help making your research. So in both aspects, we are going to ask our experts whether your research is about artificial intelligence or whether you are using artificial intelligence, and if they answer yes, we will ask the experts to assess the technical robustness of the artificial intelligence-based systems that you plan to develop or that you plan to use. So in both cases, it is important that you include information in your proposal about the aspect that you can find in this slide. So whether the artificial intelligence is technically robust, is accurate, is reproducible, is socially robust, it functions as intended, and you include explanation about what is the decision-making process that this artificial intelligence-based system uses. So, and I believe with this I've finished, so if you can go to the next slide, please. I think there was some important information about the cluster 5. So can you go to the next slide, please? Yes, no, I still have some information to mention about the ethics review. No, please go to the ethics review. Yeah, thank you. So about the ethics review in Horizon Europe, we have practically full continuity with regards to Horizon 2020. So we do an ethics review in all proposals submitted to Horizon Europe, and the ethics review is based on a self-assessment, so based on the questions that you answer in the proposal part 8 about ethics issues. Depending on your answers and depending on the assessment of the experts, then we may or may not do an ethics review more in depth. What we want to change in Horizon Europe is that we want to concentrate in complex and serious cases. This is in terms of the follow-up of funded projects, and reduce the number of ethics requirements in funded projects. So this is an intention, and we will see how this works in practice with the first projects that we will fund in Horizon Europe. And then the next slide. is about the security scrutiny. So, yes, and for this we have some novelties in Horizon Europe, because security scrutiny, we were already doing it in Horizon 2020, but only to the topics that were flagged as security sensitive in Horizon 2020. The change that we include in Horizon Europe is that we will do a kind of pre-assessment about security issues all across the program. And for this, we will base our assessment in the answers that you provide to the security questionnaire, which is simpler than the ethics questionnaire. And we ask you questions about whether the proposal uses or generates EU classified information, whether there is potential of misuse of results that could be channeled into crime or terrorism, and whether the activities involve information or material subject to national security restrictions. So if you answer no to all these questions and then we confirm that this is the case, so we stop here our security assessment. But if there is some answer to yes to some of these questions, then we will do a security scrutiny more in depth, as we were doing in Horizon 2020 with the security flagged topics. So if you can go to the next slide, please. Yes, and then finally, some tips for the Cluster 5 work program. So next slide, please. Some of them I already mentioned. So for the page limit, please read carefully the topic conditions, because there are exceptions for all innovation actions in Cluster 5. So the page limit is 70 pages. For CSA, there are a few exceptions, and the page limit is 45 instead of 30. And for RIAs, there are also a few exceptions where the page limit is 60 instead of 45. So please read carefully the topic conditions. So for the technology readiness levels, it is specified in 139 topics out of the 186. So please, again, read carefully and pay attention to the language in the topic conditions. So please, when we write shall or must, this is, we have already thought about what we are writing. So please read carefully and take into consideration all the aspects that you need to take into consideration. For the exceptions and the topic conditions, you please better consult the table that is introduced in the work program, in the PDF file, because all this information may not appear in the funding and tenders portal. Like, for instance, the estimated project budget size. And for destination 2, this is a cross-cutting call, so multidisciplinary cross-sectorial solutions are expected. And this is all what I wanted to say, so probably my colleagues from Cluster 5 will give you more detailed information. So with this, I finish the presentation. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Isabel, for this very, very comprehensive presentation. I would like to thank again also to the two previous speakers who pre-recorded their videos, and I think we really got a very comprehensive overview of the practical aspects on grant management, audits, and submission and evaluations in Horizon Europe. Although it was not explicitly stated, but I think you are aware and our colleagues are doing their best, and it's an ongoing effort that we are doing in preparation of Horizon Europe, but we did it already through Horizon 2020, and that is the simplification. By simplification, we mean, of course, streamlining and simplifying administrative procedures in view as the procedures being user-friendly for applicants. Although the presentations were quite exhaustive, I'm sure there will be questions now. I've been informed by the organizers that there are already some questions waiting. Isabel is also waiting, and we have another colleague from our side whom you have not yet seen, and that's El Alami, who is coming from my agency, from CINEA, and he is there, the call coordinator. So depending on the question, he might also answer some of them.
Hello, good afternoon.
So I suggest that we go directly to the questions. Yes, I see the questions, and I also see that you have voted for some of the questions. Therefore, I would suggest to start with the first one, which is the question about associated partners. So do we have to include associated partners and affiliated entities as separate participants in part A of the application? Is there an option for this? It's probably for Isabel, I guess.
Yes, this is also new in Horizon Europe. Indeed, you need to include affiliated entities and associated partners in proposal part A. And there is an option there in the SEP submission tool. It didn't work some weeks ago, but it should work well now. So if you have some problems, please contact either the help desk or the call coordinator through the messages that you see in the portal. But you should be able to find options to identify affiliated entities and associated partners in the submission tool.
Thank you, Isabel. The next question is a short one, but I think it's an important one. Is it required to have a management work package in the proposal?
If the question is for me, it's not mandatory, but it's recommendable. Yes, the work package is the solution that we offer to divide the different activities, and it's recommendable to have a different work package related only to management. But it's not mandatory, so we are not going to reject a proposal because it didn't include one work package on management. Yeah. But allow me, if you have other questions, because it's your call, please, add what I missed. Yeah.
Thank you, Isabel. More and more questions are coming. The next one relates to the gender dimension, to which you have already touched in your presentation. And the question is quite specific. If the research doesn't have gender dimension, and then there is a reference to certain topic, CL5 2022 D1021 on verifying estimates on climate forces, does it need to include gender dimension? I think it's not explicitly stated in the call text.
Well, what I explained is that the change that we have done in Horizon Europe is that we consider that gender dimension should always need to be taken into account, unless it is explicitly mentioned that it shouldn't be. Yeah, and this is the change. So Alami can say more information about this specific topic, but if it is not explicitly stated that gender dimension should not or is not important for this topic, then you need to take into consideration the gender dimension.
Yes, and I can confirm that if it has not, this question has been carefully considered when the work programs were drafted. So if you don't see the exclusion specifically mentioned in the topic, it means you have to address it.
Thank you. The next question, basically there are two questions within one question, and it's related to the international partners. So the first question is, can you confirm that the lead partner of a consortium must be based in an EU member state? And then there is a second follow-up question, can Australian partners participate in a consortium as beneficiaries?
Yes, I think I can reply to this. So the first question, Let's say when you say lead partner, if you consider the coordinator of the project, then it's not mandatorily a partner based in the EU member states. So a reminder of the rules is for coordination and support actions, you must have at least one partner from a EU member states. And for research and innovation actions or innovation actions, it's one partner from a EU member states plus 2 from other member states or associated countries, but it's just the minimum rules for composition of the consortium. Then in terms of who will lead the consortium, it's up to the consortium to decide. So for example, if I now go to the question 2, can Australian partners participate in a consortium as a beneficiary? Technically, developed countries, as we call them, such as Australia, are normally participating in the Horizon Europe with their own funds, unless they bring something exceptional that cannot be, let's say, obtained within Europe in terms of expertise or in terms of, for example, specific conditions or specific data available to them. In this case, the evaluators could decide that you could be funded, but then you would need to ask for funding in your application, knowing that if the evaluators consider it's not justified, then you could still participate on your own funds. Also, you can be a beneficiary if you indeed receive funding. Otherwise, there are other options for you to participate in the projects without being a beneficiary and without necessarily signing the grant agreement.
Can I add something?
Sure.
Yes, it's because there is also a novelty in Horizon Europe that I forgot to mention in the slides, and it's about the coordination and support actions. So the novelty in Horizon Europe is that only member states and associated countries can participate in CSAs, in coordination and support actions, unless it is explicitly mentioned in the topic condition that third countries are also allowed. So this is an important change from Horizon 2020. Yeah, that is important to know.
It's true. Yeah, I forgot that for coordination and support actions, this is more restrictive indeed. Thank you, Isabel. Let me see what are the next questions. Isabel, maybe this one for you. This new addition in the Part A forms of participants having to define what is their role.
Well, this is something that the evaluators will have access at the time they do the evaluation. So at the time the experts are assessing the quality of the consortium as a whole, they can go to this role of participants table and see whether all the needed roles are present and are allocated between the participants. So it is information that the evaluators have access and they will use at the time they evaluate the quality of the consortium as a whole.
Okay, thank you. Maybe Isabel, you could reply to this one if you know better than I do.
If I read well, projects using artificial intelligence method, will there be dedicated experts with? Yes, this is up to the call coordinator, of course, for those topics in which we are asking research on artificial intelligence. Of course, experts on artificial intelligence will be present. For all other topics, yes, if we find proposal in which the researchers are using artificial intelligence or a method that is based on artificial intelligence, we will have to bring into the experts composition in the evaluation. So we will have to bring some experts with experience in artificial intelligence. Yes, indeed.
Okay, thank you, Isabel. We have some further questions. The next one is about the role of participating organization in A forms.
Sorry, this one I think was replied.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. The next one, I think it's quite an interesting and important one. Can organizations from associated countries that are candidates right now be proposal coordinators?
I think
the answer is yes. Yes, they can be coordinators. Yes.
Indeed. And then I could highlight the next question, which is this one. And indeed, it's also, I can reply. So as annexes are not allowed, how support letters can be submitted? Can they be integrated in part B of the proposal? So yes, you will see that unless there is a specific reason in the work program to add, let's say, other annexes, you will not find annexes that are not subject to a page limit, which means that if you want to include support letters, they will have to be integrated in the part B, which is subject to the page limit. So you will have to make room for these support letters. Then this question I can also reply: are all CSAs possible as single entry, or are there some with minimum of 3? So I checked, and in the cluster 5 work program, it seems that there are no exceptions, which means that all CSAs are available to single applicants. In any case, if you look at other parts that are not cluster 5, you will find in any case the exception mentioned in the page of the call text or in the work program itself. It's always mentioned if it's the case. Then this one, I think, a bit on widening, let's say, the participation, if I understand. Is it mandatory for the organization in the consortium, I understand, to be active in the research innovation fields? Well, for research and innovation actions or innovation actions, you will see that it's mandatory in any case to have a consortium of minimum 3. And indeed, it's, let's say, the operational capacity, we call it, of the participants is part of the evaluation made when the proposal is evaluated, which means that usually in the part A, you are supposed to provide previous publications or let's say previous projects. But of course, the idea is also to try to bring in new players in the program. So your best bet is to get close to partners that are active in the field, to yourself, let's say, become more knowledgeable in these cores and areas.
Thank you, Alami, for this for your clarifications. I see 2 more questions on Slido. The first one is about companies that are based in the member state but are owned by an entity from outside the EU. For example, for topics with these restrictions of participation on third countries. So how are these companies viewed in applications?
Maybe Isabel, you could reply this one?
I will try, but I'm not really informed about the restrictions in your topics. But what I can say is at the time we validate entities, we are also validating the independency of these entities. So the entities must be must have a legal identity in one country, and this will be the country to which they will be associated, from the country of origin. It's true that in some topics we are also requesting that there should be the owners of these entities economically must not come from some countries, and this we are also checking in our validation. And it is also true that the full validation will come only at the time we prepare our grant, so at the time after the evaluation and before the grant signature. So it might be that we evaluate one proposal with taking into account what the information that we have at the time of the submission, but then this information later on may be different because we have validated the entity in our entity registry, and we also confirm the independence of the entities and organizations. So, Alami, I don't know if you can add something here because I don't know the conditions in your topics.
No, I think you explained mostly what we expect. Of course, these things are looked at during the evaluation, and while Horizon Europe is open to the world, it should also serve in a way European interests. So if let's say most of the benefits or the IPs coming out of the project would go outside Europe without benefit to European partners, it could be seen as a weakness in the evaluation. Then Isabel, sorry, go ahead. That's it for me.
Yes, so as I explained, so participants from the United Kingdom are considered participants from a to-be associated country. And for submission and evaluation of proposals, we will consider those participants as if they were coming from an associated country. So the only condition is that before the grant is signed, in the case the proposal is retained for funding, we must have concluded the association agreement with this country. This is the only condition.
Two further questions. The first one is on budget. Are there any changes in budget requirements we should be careful in the Horizon Europe compared to Horizon 2020?
Well, I don't know if my colleagues from the legal units are there, but there are not many changes, but there are some changes, and in particular in the way we calculate the personal cost. And for this, I am not the right person to answer, but I don't know if my colleagues from the legal unit are there and can answer. But indeed, this is probably the most important change. So the methodology to calculate personal cost in Horizon Europe has changed in comparison to Horizon 2020.
If I may add then for this question is that there is available the draft annotated model grant agreement, which normally should explain a bit what are the new rules in terms of calculating the personnel costs and reporting them in your proposal.
Thank you, both of you. There is another question, the last one so far, which relates to page limitations. In Cluster 5, innovation actions have page limit of 70 pages, while the general proposal template is based on 45 pages. So the question is, does the same proposal template apply, or will there be another?
Well, it's important to note that what we publish in the portal, in the reference documents, are standard proposal templates. So the template that you need to use for the topic for which you are submitting your proposal is the template that you download from the submission tool at the time you start the submission of the application. So in these topics where there is an exception in the page limit, you will be able to download a template that takes into consideration already the exceptional number of page limits for this topic.
Thank you, Isabel. Alami, you are managing the Slido. Are there any further questions? Yes, there are.
Yes.
So the first one is it recommended to have an advisory board? So it's basically two questions in the same question. And the second one, can JRC participate as beneficiary or in the advisory board? JRC, Joint Research Center of the Commission.
I can answer the question about the JRC. So this is also a novelty in Horizon Europe. No, the JRC cannot participate as beneficiaries in our proposals and projects. They can participate, but not as a beneficiary. So there is some kind of methodology of the steps that you need to follow in order to involve the JRC. They also have some topics already mentioned in the work program where they plan that they could contribute. And then you need to take into consideration the activities that the JRC can do in your project. But you just need to bilaterally contact the JRC in order to let them participate in your project. But they don't participate as beneficiaries. They don't receive a budget from the budget of the project, because there is already some budget going to the JRC in the Horizon Europe program. And about advisory boards, I cannot answer. I don't know, Alami, if you can answer this.
I mean, this is related to the management structures usually of a project. And you will notice that for people who are familiar with the Horizon 2020 evaluations and proposals, the question on the, let's say, the management structures in the implementation criteria has been removed. So this is not so much assessed anymore. What you need to have is indeed a sound, let's say, decision-making process, especially related to risk assessment. But no, it's not mandatory to have an advisory board. And yes, then it depends pretty much on the topic you are applying to. Some of them could benefit from one, and others may not be so relevant.
Thank you. So there is, for the moment, the last question. Where is the draft AGA available? And I think, if I guess correctly, this means annotated grant agreement.
Yes, and for this one, actually, for the participants who are able to see the full version of Slido, I already pasted the link to the draft annotated model grant agreement, so it can be found there now.
Another question. In the Part A application forms, we can upload up to 5 previous publications, data sets, etc. Does the number 5 refers to the total?
Well, it's not clear the question, but what I can say is that we are asking up to 5 previous publication datasets per participant in the project. I don't know if this will answer the project, because I don't know what the total.
I think yes, 5, maybe if I understand the question well myself, is if the applicant is asking whether it's 5 publications plus 5 data sets. But I think it's 5 indeed publications, and it is per participant, my understanding as well.
One more question arrived. Can a person with a master's degree in engineering be involved as a partner or consultant in a consortium? So it's quite a concrete question.
Yes, and it's concrete, but yet not so specific. It depends. Either you are, let's say, employed by the consortium, and then you are, let's say, personnel, or you are a consultant, and then your cost would go as subcontracting to one of the beneficiaries. So, but I don't see the reason not to.
Okay, I don't see any further questions. I must say I didn't count the questions, but I think we answered 15, 20 about. So I would really like to thank now everybody for the active participation. So all of you who listened and was active in asking the questions, and I hope we managed to provide you some useful answers. Again, I would like to ask you and thank to our presenters and Alami, who was not a presenter, but he was managing the slider and he also answered quite a number of the questions. So the organizers have provided me with some facts and figures about these last 2 days that are slowly ending. We had about 18,000 logins. I would not dare to say there were 18,000 participants, but at least there have been 18,000 logins, which is an impressive number. During the last 2 days, we have launched 20 sessions and more than 500 questions have been asked live. And I think this figure 500 doesn't take into account the last session. Together with you, we have made the first ever Info Days on Horizon Europe Cluster 5. On behalf of the organizers, we would like to thank you all for your participation. In case you have missed any session, please be reminded that all videos are available on the website of the Info Days. And in case you still have questions, please remember to consult the Funding and Tenders portal. There you will find all information related to the course and also the frequently asked questions. If you allow me temporarily, I will just put on my hat as head of department in CINEA. That is the body that will implement all the Horizon Europe grants for Cluster 5, to let you know that our agency is looking forward to working with you and supporting you in your projects. I think it's clear from the intensive work during the last 2 days that we will have much work to do, not only for the 2021 call, but for the next 7 years of Horizon Europe. Therefore, joint solutions are needed. It's not enough to look at challenges from only one perspective. The joint creation approach of the Horizon Europe program and its clusters is in line with this reality. We trust that we can maximize impact and advance further. The Horizon Europe missions that have been mentioned several times during these 2 days will also be a materialization of this approach to foster faster and more efficient solutions. We will learn more about the Horizon Europe missions soon, so please have them on the back of your mind, also as potential funding sources for your projects. The policy objectives of the Green Deal are ambitious, but the urgency of our times demands strong and sustainable actions to fight climate change while supporting Europe in recovery from the COVID crisis towards a more green, digital, and resilient economy and society. Together we can advance Europe and reach climate neutrality by 2050. I think also through the projects that we will fund through Horizon Europe. We hope that these Info Days have provided you with the information needed for your proposals, and we wish you the best of luck. Thank you all, and I wish you a nice afternoon.